There we go. I was listening to a little bit of the actual over the air signal versus in the studio signal. And that gives me a good flavor of what you're all hearing. Speaking of hearing, that may actually be part of the discussion this morning. Jeremy Daly is here, joining us from Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls, and he's a physician assistant. And he will spend some time this morning talking with us about cell phone use. Now, I should point out as well that long ago, I gave up my landline because I thought, why have a second bill every month? And since I can take the cell phone with me, it's become my exclusive. Actually, I have two of them over here. So I guess I'm a two fisted cell phone user. Uh, but first of all, Jeremy, welcome back.
Thanks. Great to be here.
The segment is Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. Bill Colley with you as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And not just hearing, but there's a number of different issues that we're growing concerned about with cell phone use.
Oh, certainly. Now, if hearing were the bigger issue, that'd be a different story. Now, I would probably be surprised if anyone felt like they use their cell phone or think of their cell phone as a device to talk to other people on, because it doesn't happen very often. It seems like making a phone call and kind of the intended purpose initially of the cell phone has somewhat gone to the wayside as far as its functionality. It's the other things that a cell phone can do really that make it attractive to people and in some ways make it actually becomes an addiction for a lot of people. And that's some of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, well, what does it do to your health? What are the negative health consequences of cell phones?
The other day, I was here at the office and I had to lock up on the way out, and I set the alarm and then turned to go out the door, and I could hear the alarm starting to beep. And I have about 20 seconds to get out, but then I started hearing this cheering noise and then a voice, and I literally, practically jumped out of my shoes. And I realized it was the phone in my pocket. I pulled it up and I'd accidentally hit one of the apps. I have a lot of apps for various college and professional football programs. And I hit the app and it was replaying some video from a football game with the cheering of the crowd. And that's, again, there's so much more on these phones, but I go out and I see people just sitting in restaurants, couples who should be talking together, and they're both engrossed in their phones instead.
Exactly. And that's, one of the things that we see really often is it tends to take the place of conversation. We become engrossed in kind of the virtual life that we have as far as, oh, what are people saying about me on Facebook? And did somebody like my post? Or does someone comment on my status on Facebook? Or, who's texting me now? Rather than focusing on the individuals, the human beings that are in our presence, those people tend to be less exciting for some reason than the people over the phone.
It is a little bit like I've seen those stories on TV on some of the animal shows where you'll take a spider monkey, for instance, and it's being trained to, and it does something right. It can press a button and it gets a little pellet of a reward and eats the reward. In many ways, being on the phone, looking for email, looking to see if you got a comment on Facebook, et cetera, is our human version of getting that reward, that pellet.
Oh, exactly, exactly. And many times we don't. We're not getting that email, but we like to check for it. And there's a lot of people. Some of these statistics actually show that people tend to check their phones even when they don't feel a buzz or hear a ring. No prompting. They feel like, oh, I just need to check my phone and make sure, even though I know, the cue that tells me one of those things has come in, make sure that there's nothing there. Um, so yeah, I mean, it definitely can become kind of a concern. Now, in terms of it actually being an addiction, it hasn't met the criteria quite yet, or hasn't been put in what we call the DSM, basically the manual that we use to make psychiatric and psychological diagnoses. And so it's not quite there yet, but researchers are starting to compare it to gambling in terms of what it does to your body. Now think about this. So every time, just like you were saying, you there's that reward for doing a good behavior, and what happens when in terms of the primate that you're talking about. I can't remember if it was a
Spider monkey.
spider monkey. Okay, so the spider monkey gets a reward for doing some kind of behavior. Well, the food is a reward for sure, but what's a better reward for that spider monkey is what's called dopamine. Your brain is very hardwired to respond to external stimuli. So when something pleasurable happens, when, for instance, you get that reward, you get a text, you get an email, someone likes your status, you get a hit of dopamine. And when you get the hit of dopamine, you feel good. The same thing happens when you're gambling and you win big. Oh man, that was huge. You got so much dopamine there. So what do you want? You want more of it. So you go back and you go back and you go back. And the same thing happens over and over again until it becomes an addiction. And we want that dopamine.
We've got more coming up with Jeremy Daly from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. It's 8:40, and we're at 68. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Of course, we're going to make things in the next coming months even more difficult for people when we add the app for the radio station. Our guest in the studio, Jeremy Daly. He is a physician assistant at Tripp Family Medicine, which is on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. Jeremy, if people would like to get in touch with the office because you're still looking for new patients at Tripp Family Medicine,
Absolutely.
how do they go about doing it?
Yeah, give us a call at 933-4400, and you can talk to one of the amazing front desk staff. We have some really good ladies working at the front desk. Get a hold of us you can get to know us on our website at trippfamilymedicine.com. On our Facebook page, you can learn more about what we're doing in the community. This week, for instance, for those who are patients with us, we're doing a patient appreciation event at the city pool, right by Twin Falls High School. And if you want to come, RSVP. We're going to have a list, and we're going to have a lot of people there. It's going to be fun. We'll have a good time swimming and have the grills going, make some food, and it's going to be a good time. So
maybe some watermelon.
I hope so. I hope so. I'm not sure exactly what's on the menu, but it's going to be good, I'm sure.
We were talking about cell phones and some of the troubles that are starting to arise from people's use because they occupy so much of our time, and it's a gadget now. It's like walking. It's the tricorder from Star Trek, if you will, with all of the things it actually does. I read a couple of weeks ago, and I think I've experienced this, maybe not quite to this degree, but people when they forget and leave the phone at home. Now, when I've only owned a cell phone of my own since 2006. Prior to that, I'd have them assigned from work, and I didn't care to carry them around. They only did phone calls and texting back then anyway. And in the beginning, only phone calls. And, it's a work phone, so it was like having, an albatross around your neck. But when I got the first smartphone and I got all these extra things, and now I'll be driving to work, and if I've left it at home, it bothers you to a point where 10 years ago, I never would have thought about this. I have read where the depression that people are feeling is like a heavy loss if they leave the phone behind somewhere.
That's exactly right. And there was actually one of the articles that I had read preparing for this was in a Psychology Today article that was written basically on cell phone addiction. And it said that 40% of smartphone users experience anxiety if they leave their device home. And it's enough anxiety to a lot of times spur them to stop whatever they're doing, go back and retrieve that phone, because heaven forbid they would go a morning or to the store without having a phone just in case they may need it at that moment. And I think that becomes a problem. Now, in terms of some of the things that to look for, and this isn't like I said, this isn't anything as far as if you have these, you have a cell phone addiction. But I think it's a good way, kind of a litmus test for yourself to say, do I use this more than I should? Is it having negative health consequences? So definitely some of the questions that one of the articles that I'm referring to was asking is there a need to use a cell phone more and more often in order to achieve the same desired effect? So kind of like a drug, right?
Mm-hmm.
Persistent failed attempts to use cell phones less often, trying to quit but can't do it. Preoccupation with smartphone use. Turns to cell phone when experiencing unwanted feelings of anxiety and depression. So almost like you would with any other kind of drug, right? has put a relationship at risk or job at risk due to excessive cell phone use. Tolerance. You need a new one. You need the better one. More applications, more use. Withdrawal. So when the cell phone is gone or it's unreachable at that time, is there anger, tension, depression, restlessness, irritability?
This, I would think, is affecting every age group, though, too, because even though I didn't have, I mean, I'm a latecomer to this technology, and even the smartphone, I didn't get one until 2012, simply because at work they told me that I should have it versus the old, just I had the old straight flip
Mm-hmm.
phone with text and calls. But I got a promotion, and somebody said we want you to have this, so essentially they can be in touch with me wherever I happen to go. I would think that among younger people who've grown up with this technology, some of these symptoms are worse. But I got to be honest with you, I see plenty of people who have white hair sitting at restaurant using these things and constantly checking them.
Yeah, I think it's a problem among all generations. There's no question about that. And you see, one of the things that I see that to me is just it blows me away is people will come into the office and they can't put down their cell phones. And it's all generations. It's not just your tweens and teenagers that have to constantly be updating their social media profile pictures and things like that. The selfie generation, so to speak. It's all walks of life. It's men, women, children. They won't put their cell phone away. And sometimes I have to specifically ask them to put their cell phone away because, at that time, let's focus on what we're doing right here.
I
Let's
need you to cough right now. Put that phone down.
Well, some of the statistics, things that I'm not going to share today, I mean, it would really surprise, I think, a lot of people in terms of when people are using their cell phones. So it's interesting. The difference is, though, I think between people like you and I who grew up, our formative years were without cell phones. I didn't get my first cell phone until I was into my college years, which is pretty young to get a cell phone, I think. Um, but still, until then, I had not had a cell phone. You know that you can live without it. You've lived without it before. There's no question that the world functioned really well prior to the age of cell phones. Maybe even better. Maybe even better.
Well, I remember watching a movie, and want to point out we're at 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Jeremy Daly is our guest. He's a physician assistant with Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls, and we're at 70. Bill Colley with you as well on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. A movie called The Lonely Guy that was out in the 1980s with Steve Martin and a couple of other well known Hollywood comedians. And these were single guys, and it was the single guys all talking about, the challenges they had in their lives. And Steve Martin goes to a restaurant alone. And because he's very uncomfortable, this is pre-cell phone era. He's alone. He's uncomfortable, so he pretends to be a food critic. That's why he's eating alone. He doesn't want to pretend that he's just alone. And I have experienced that when you go out to eat. Sometimes you go into a restaurant, you sit down if you're alone, and there's no newspaper to sit there and read or peruse. Then you sit around and you feel nervous just sitting there while you wait for your dinner or your breakfast, whatever you've ordered. And in this day and age, I think a lot of people turn to that phone just to combat that, I don't know, social nervousness they have in that situation.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, we've all been there. We've all been in a waiting room. We've all been on a plane next to someone that maybe we didn't want to talk to or obviously didn't want to talk to us. And so I think we all know that kind of awkward silence, so to speak. Um, but but I think, in terms of use at other times, that's when it becomes a problem. I I, I still I think I have a problem with that too, as far as, you get to know people when you put down your phone. You get to enjoy people around you. You get to meet people you wouldn't have otherwise met because you know, you'll think, oh, well, who is this person sitting next to me? Well, what's going on with them? Why are they here? What are they doing? And you get to know them. But if you have a cell phone, if they have a cell phone, oh, I don't want to disturb them. I don't want to bother them, or I don't want to talk to them. So I'm just going to pretend like I'm busy. I think that happens quite a bit.
And you talk about the potential for addiction. These people who are walking through malls and falling into these fountains because they're not paying. People have been walking down the street and stepped into traffic. That part of it I haven't experienced, but it amazes me that I can see people that are so contained in what they're doing. They've literally blocked out all other stimuli around them.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Well, you mentioned the injuries of falling into a fountain, which in terms of things that could happen, probably, I mean, obviously embarrassing, maybe a little bit of injury to that. But you think about things that are a bigger deal, like, you know, texting in a car, which is a huge deal. I mean, whenever we hear of an accident nowadays, it's usually, uh, I mean, I feel like most of the time that's what you're hearing about, and that might be a generalization, but I feel like you hear about that quite a bit. People saying, "Oh, they were probably texting, or they were texting," and you think, man, just to answer a text message, somebody died.
It is easy to tell people take some time every day and put this thing down and find something else to do. It's easy to say that. I don't think it's so easy to get people to do it.
I don't think so either, and I think that's why it's good to recognize like what can actually happen if you're continuing to use these phones on a regular basis. We talked a little bit about some of the questions to ask yourself to say, oh, is this a problem? Is this an addiction? Well, what are some of the negative health consequences? So I'm just going to list a couple of these and we can talk about these. Eye strain. Digital eye strain is a big problem. I mean, definitely, especially over 2 hours a day of screen time, you're going to have some eye strain. So eye problems are something that a lot of people are experiencing. Headaches. I see headaches all the time, and I often wonder, is this because of, or is cell phone use a contributor to the headache that they're experiencing right now? Neck problems. Cell phone neck. I mean, I don't know if anyone is familiar with that term, but it's a pretty common thing to have kind of a crick in your neck after you've been bent over staring at your smartphone. Um, and then increased illness. The statistic is 1 in 6 people, or 1 in 6 phones actually have E. coli on them, which typically comes from fecal material. So, I mean, besides the fact that there's communicable disease coming from these and the injuries, we're talking about addiction, and we're talking about it dramatically affecting your quality of life. Probably the other thing that I see the most that I feel like really in terms of people experiencing some negative health consequences of cell phones is cell phone use in the evenings. I mean, I have so many patients who cannot sleep. They complain of not being able to sleep. And I say, what's the first thing you do when you can't sleep? They say, I reach for my phone, or I turn the TV on. But most of the time it's reach for my phone. And more they're finding that, you turn that blue light on and what wakes up your brain? You don't go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are struggling with insomnia and they're coming in for medical treatment for insomnia. What do I do? And you say, well, put your phone down. And it is a hard thing because there's an addiction there.
You mentioned the E. coli, and I read too where people are got about a minute to go, but because they feel that time spent on the throne is a bit of a waste of their time, they're now sitting there with their phones because they can still stay in touch with the outside world and take care of business in a couple of ways, if you will, and that's the health hazard there.
There you go. And I think the statistic was that 19% of people use their cell phone while going to the bathroom. So it is there. It happens.
We should be washing our cell phones or wiping them down maybe with Windex or something at least once or twice a day, I would imagine.
Yeah, even something that has some antibacterial properties to it. If you have a Clorox wipe, that would be even better. Something that can kill things like E. coli. So the same things that you would use to clean off your counter after spilling eggs on it, salmonella obviously is what we're trying to kill there, but E. coli is another bacteria that we're trying to kill. So think about it the same way. Your cell phone has probably more, and arguably if you have younger children, probably a lot more if they're ever touching your cell phone bacteria on it than most things in your house.
Before we wrap up, one more time for people who would like to get in touch with Tripp Family Medicine, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, call us. We have great people, and we We like to talk. We like to talk face to face. And it's at 933-4400 is our telephone number. Just right across from the post office on Fillmore is the location. So come in and see us and get to know us. And I think you'll like the care that we give.
And we want to thank Jeremy Daly for dropping by today. We'll see you again sometime soon in the rotation. It's like dealing with a starting pitching staff. Uh, we have a number of different people who come through, but every once in a while, when somebody else is ill, you get to pitch 2 days in a row.
Every now and then.
We've got news coming up in just a couple of minutes. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. An hour left of our program. In fact, in the next hour, we're going to talk a little bit about a lawsuit filed by Idaho Democrats against the state, saying that the state shouldn't comply with a request for voter registration data, even though the lawsuit has been filed while the federal government has backed down and said, well, we're going to pause the request. We've got more on the way.